This is a recording of You Gentiles by Maurice. This book is in the public domain. Recording by Grips. Chapter 13. The Mechanism of Dissolution. This would be an ideal condition, presumably the merging together of Jew and Gentile, for the production of a world neither wholly Gentile nor yet dual with Jew and Gentile, but composed of both in certain proportion fixed by our numbers and the laws of heredity. That is, at least, the best solution within view, and if we are to be reasonable, on paper at least, it would be the only one to be considered. But we must remember that this ideal cannot be realized in one generation, or in two, or in five. If we were to assume that within this generation the Jewish world could be won over to this point of view, it would still need 4 or 5 generations to obliterate our identity. At that, it would call for forcible intermarriage, for even when we cease to believe in endogamy, we will practice it because our affections so incline us. It would have to become a sort of principle that in the name of the great ideal of a solution of the Jewish problem, the Jew shall be forbidden to marry among his own. But it is clear that even if intensive propaganda were to break down our prohibitions against intermarriage, it would have to work progressively. It would take many generations to carry the change successively through all the strongholds of Jewish life. And when we add to the time thus needed, the time needed for actual absorption by intermarriage, we are faced with a task for centuries. But I will deal with ideal conditions. I will deal with a single large group of Jews determined to abandon their identity and to lose themselves and their children in the surrounding Gentile world. We know well that their children will not yet be assimilated in the full sense of the word. Children of mixed Jewish-Gentile percentage still carry the Jewish stigma. The child of a half-Jew and a complete Gentile is in better plight, and the Jewish great-grandfather is hardly any handicap at all. The third generation, as the saying is, produces the gentleman. It needs at least 3 generations of intermediary stage, probably more. It would be absurd to expect absorption in a single generation. It never happens. There is needed a transition period, and it is this transition period which you Gentiles will not tolerate. Even if you believe that the best thing that could happen to the Jew would be his complete absorption by intermarriage, you oppose, tacitly, but not less obstinately, his steps in that direction. You want us to intermarry, but you don't want to intermarry. You want us to produce Gentile offspring without having taken your sons and daughters as mates. In other words, you want an end without permitting the means. The prospect of a Jewless world is charming indeed, but who will enjoy the actuality? Your grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And who will have to pay the price of the first embarrassing contact, the first difficult intimacy? Jewish sons and daughters-in-law, Jewish fathers and mothers-in-law. You yourselves. The prospect is too distant, too hypothetical to exert any influence. It is much too much like the promise of heaven and the threat of hell. I have alluded more than once to the fact that westernization of the Jew is nowhere a guarantee against anti-Semitism. Indeed, conscious modern anti-Semitism, the formulated fear of the Jew as the racial bearer of alien and dangerous ideas, is the result of westernization. Far from encouraging or tolerating our intermarriage with you, you do not even relish the results of our westernization or gentilization. It is an amazing and terrifying paradox. You would like us to be absorbed, but you shrink from the process. The inoculation is painful, even revolting. You are uneasy and unhappy when we swarm into your universities, your professions. The nearer we come to you, the more you dislike us. You dislike us because we are different, and when we make efforts to overcome the difference, we are forced into a proximity which rouses your inmost resentment. The Ku Klux Klan, the awakening Magyars, the Consul, no longer warn you against the religious and secluded Jew, the ghetto and the Talmud. They warn you against the baptizing Jew, against the assimilating Jew, against the intermarrying Jew. They warn you, indeed, against that part of the Jewish people which is apparently in the process of realization of the ultimate ideal, the disappearance of the Jewish people. Another aspect of the mechanics of dissolution makes clear a difficulty somewhat more subtle, but even more effective. The death of a people or of a type can be natural only. Race suicide as an ideal is a contradiction, for an ideal is a manifestation of life. Deliberately to set before ourselves the objective of self-elimination would be as absurd as a man insisting on watching himself fall asleep. It can be done tacitly only. It can happen, but it cannot be propagated. We might drift out of consciousness, but every effort to accelerate the pace would retard the process. To appeal to Jews to cease to be Jews because they are Jews is to accentuate their Jewishness. Of course, the effort has been made, but with those grotesque and unnatural results which are in part responsible for your aversion to the process. There is nothing more ludicrous and pitiful than the Jew who has made his gentilization a deliberate idea. His anxious self-repression, his self-disclaimers, his demand to be considered a Gentile, his uneasy sense of inferiority, his impotent resentment of all that reminds him of his origin, make him an object of scorn alike to you and to us. There are, quote-unquote, assimilated Jews who hate with ignoble and consuming hatred the unassimilated part of Jewish people. Jews who, rousing your secret contempt as renegades and your resentment as intruders, attribute their discomfort, falsely, to those Jews who are most obviously Jewish. For the gentilizing Jew is reluctant to admit that his very gentilization accentuates his Jewishness to you. His only recourse to save the last remnant of his self-respect is to blame the unassimilating Jew. In eager self-vindication, he points at the object lesson of the sufferings of Orthodox and national Jewries and associates his own severer sufferings with the same cause. He deliberately ignores the fact that the cradle of the newer anti-Semitism is the country which witnessed the first efforts of the Jew to make a high ideal of assimilation. Germany, which in the 19th century offered the classic example of Jewish assimilation, both internal and external, also became the country of classic anti-Semitism. Terrified at the infiltration of Jewish blood, the German Gentile recast his formulae of Jew hatred in such wise as to arrest the process. When we examine the mechanism of dissolution in detail and come down to an examination of its working on the individual, we understand better the revolting character of at least its first effects. It is one thing to say that a people in the first stages of dissolution is as horrible a spectacle as a body in the first stages of putrefaction, but this sounds somewhat academic, perhaps even metaphysical. Even so, there is little conveyed in the statement that a country is starving. We realize the import of the statement only when we speak of hungry men and women. When we examine the personal reactions of the deliberately assimilating Jew, we see more clearly why he is not a pleasant spectacle either to the Jew or the Gentile. A Jew who has made the repression of his Jewishness an ideal must be prepared to suffer and to seem to ignore every slight, every rebuff which he encounters. He must not permit an open sneer to sting him into Jewish self-consciousness. Such weakness would undo his purpose. He must seem to be unaware of the occasional coolness which follows the accidental revelation of his origin. He must bear silently with those countless unspoken snubs, half-snubs, unuttered queries, faint "ah yes" astonishments, which will be his lot until the day of his death. He must not feel himself implicated in a general slander of the Jews. He may only protest in a generous, disinterested sort of way, as a fair-minded Gentile. An angry retort or repudiation might be the ruin of him. He would suddenly realize the intolerable nature of his position. It is not an easy thing to kill oneself by degrees. Such a Jew has the whole way to go. He is not entering a world already made easier for him by an admixture of Jewish blood. He does not move forward to a partly prepared position. All is alien around him. His claims have no precedent. There is something pitifully impotent in his demand, quote, "But I am an Englishman like you, an American like you. I have no affiliations outside of this country except those general human affiliations which I share with you. I feel for my co-religionists abroad nothing more nor less than you feel for your fellow Christians among the Turks. Between me and my fellow Jews in this country there is nothing more than between Protestant and Protestant, Catholic and Catholic." Unquote. Quote, "I am part and parcel of your country. Our forefathers came later, but our posterity will stay as strong. There is no difference between you and me except a very slight difference of faith, nothing really worth mentioning. In all else we are utterly alike. Do not let yourself be misled by the apparent contrast between me and my unassimilated co-religionists. It is merely a matter of externals. In a little while, in a generation or two, they will be like me, indistinguishable from you. They will be Americans in every respect. Your destiny and ours, your outlook and ours, your hopes and ours are identical." Unquote. But his plea falls on skeptical ears. There is that in the very name of Jew which invalidates his protestations, and the more vehemently he urges his case, the more suspicious and uneasy you become, for he is urging as an accomplished fact that which is nothing but a hopeless personal aspiration. Your demand is not connected with behavior or with views. Neither of these makes the American or the Englishman. It is a question of identity. You want us to be Anglo-Saxons or Teutons, if you are to call us Englishmen or Germans, and we cannot be that. At best, our great-grandchildren can be as nearly that as matters, but we cannot remarry our great-grandparents. We cannot but exasperate you by such importunate assumptions that strangers, aliens to your blood, should come to dwell in your midst, is one thing. That they should claim, after a sojourn of a generation or two, complete identity with you is as absurd as it is insolent. And even if they should dwell in your midst 1,000 years, yet should keep apart, neither giving nor taking in marriage, they are not identical with you. In those words, our ancestry, our forefathers, there are implied the dearest and tenderest of human associations. The love of his forebears and of his posterity is all that man has of earthly immortality. The pride and affection, which are the natural counterparts of those concepts, are as narrow and as broad, as potent for good and evil, as sexual love, as life itself. Shall we come to you and share your ancestry? Shall we intrude on these exalted recollections with quote-unquote "we too"? You cannot help resenting these claims. They savor at once of ingratiating humility and arrogant blasphemy. Try as you will, you cannot make the concession. you are trapped by a vital paradox. You may ask, what difference is there between a Jew claiming to be an American and an Italian claiming to be one? Is it more humiliating for one than for the other? Is the Italian of our ancestry more than you? There is some similarity in the plight of all foreigners, and we Jews suffer all that foreigners suffer. But our case is unique because we are unique. If there is anything in what I have said, the cleft between you, Americans and Italians, Frenchmen and Germans, is but a wide jump as compared with the chasm between us and any one of you. What is true of the Gentile foreigner in this regard is 10 times true to us. For our very record testifies against us. The older the past from which we attempt to flee, the closer it pursues us. To you, who share with us the human attribute of pride of ancestry, it seems incredible that, having retained our identity for 100 generations, we should abandon it in one. It is suspicious and odious, for you suspect rightly that in this tenacity of identity, which has outlived so many nations and civilizations, there is implied a kernel of individuality, which is as singular in its nature as in its history. Among yourselves, assimilation is problem enough. The birth and death of nations is attended by wars, pains, humiliations. But what you have done a dozen times over in the last 4,000 years, we have not done once. We cannot assimilate. It is so humiliating to us that we become contemptible in submitting to the process. It is so exasperating to you that even if we were willing to submit, it would avail us nothing.